hello, each and every last one of you all. First of all, let me say that it is great seeing you all again today. I really miss you guys. I really hope that you enjoyed our very first Reading Rainbow Book Club and you got a lot of information from the book. As you can see, we are still in the throe of No Ashes in the Fire by Mr. Darnell Moore. When I tell you this is a book that you have to devour, it's like a good sandwich. You got to keep going and going and going. Um, Again, let me introduce myself. My name is Aaron Todd. I am the teen librarian here at the lovely Raleigh Library. And I'm so glad that you all here today. And I hope that you take something out of it. I'm not going to be before you long, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So, the last thing that we left off of was chapters 1 through 3, and we're going through the dynamics of Mr. Darnell Moore's early life, from when he was conceived all the way up to we want to say about the age of 9. We talked about how he describes his environment and how he goes about saying how he had to like create a world within the world due to the harshness and the poverty stricken neighborhood in which he was raised. We talked about the generational factors that came about, how his grandmother was a home mother, but due to the economic disparities that a lot of black people have faced in this country and still facing right now, how she had to lose her home, how she lost her home, and then how she had to move into the projects, and how that actually the tone in which she set in home ownership and that do-it-yourself attitude began to lax within the generations. um Again, when you're doing a book club or when you're reading the book, as we stated before, it's always essential to take notes. And as you all can see, I have extensive notes from just one chapter. You don't want to see the other pages. This is just one chapter, and when I tell you guys, it is all right. Let's get into it. So, I have some key things that I really want to talk about today, and some of those key things that we're going to point about, we're going to talk about the tone, because if we go back and we really look at the book and the tone in which Donnell Moore is trying to um, put forth, we can see that one is a very serious based tone, but at the same time, it's kind of lax to it. I believe Darnell's more ideal of writing is like I'm speaking to you and you're speaking to me. There's a connection there. He wanted to have some type of relatability. And in having that relatability, he wanted to connect with the audience. So as you can see, he has a poetic tone in his writing. Don't get me wrong. The tone is very poetic. But in essence, he really wanted to connect with the reader to let them know that these are some of the things that I have dealt with as a child, and having that relatability draws the reader in. And one thing that was so relatable with Mr. Darnell Moore was the fact that when he speaks on his mother and his father being teenage parents. My mother was a teenage mother, and my father was a teenage father, and it was very hard for them to navigate childhood and parenthood, and that was a whole new world for them. And there was a lot of trials and errors. And even now, when I go back, I speak with my mom and I ask her, "How is it that you dealt with being a teen mother and having to go to school and raise us?" And she told us how hard it was, but because she had a good, strong foundation as far as a family, her mother, her grandmother, and so forth, they were able to help them. And that's the same thing that Mr. Donnell Moore has. He talks about how his parents had to establish a village, because the old African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. He speaks on the fact that him having teenage parents, there was a lot of trials and errors. There was a lot of things that they did, and they really didn't really comprehend the, how can I put it? They really couldn't comprehend the aesthetics of being parents and raising a young black child during that time. And he speaks on a lot of trials and error and how his father was more like a brother than he was a father, but at the same time, his father was dealing with so much. I think he was dealing with drugs, alcoholism, and so forth, and how that actually played a key part in his rearing and his social emotional development, and even getting to the point. But now we're in chapter 4 and 5. When we go into his preteens, how he began to develop a hatred towards his father. And we begin to see in the end of chapter 4 that his father, the last image he had of his father before he walked out of his life was a fight that he had with his mother, because his father was very abusive towards his mother, and he talked about how that played an emotional impact on him as a man, and seeing how the black man, in his words, could defile the essence of the black woman, and how he was felt more connected with his mother versus his father. Now we begin to see the breakdown of masculinity, because that's another thing that Mr. Donna Moore was really touching on, the breakdown of masculinity, and how his father ideal of being a man was this domineering presence, being a domineering presence that had to rule everything. But at the same time, there was still a somber tone when he spoke of his father, because in some ways there was a hatred. He did have a hatred for his fathers, but in another, there was some type of humanity that he still saw in his father, because he had to realize his father dealt with a lot emotionally, mentally, physically. And even him being a young father and having and going to do the revolving doors of the judicial system, because it's like he's speaking about how his father was in and out of prison, and how the anger began to build up, and how he had to connect somehow to his manhood. But he felt that masculinity was built around the compass of a domineering presence. There's something that I want to read to you, and I marked it this time. Y'all was getting on me last time because I was like fumbling and dumbling do it, but I marked this particular passage, and Mr. Morris speaks on how his father shares a birthday with a very prominent black man that we all know and love, Dr. Martin Luther King. And he talked about the aesthetics and the essence of these two different individuals, and how America viewed black men. So I'm going to read these right here, and we're going to take a deeper look. January 15th is a day full of complexity. Every celebration of Martin Luther King Jr.'s birth is another opportunity to highlight the types of college educated, Christian married, suit wearing, and respectable black men society dreams worthy of public praise. My father was born in 1961 on the same day as King, but 30 years later. Two black men, one an American hero, and other is proverbial nightmare. Wow. I'm going to read just a little bit more. America is obsessed with the images of the good black man whom there's a word there. I'm not going to even say it. Whom blank should strive to emulate. Forget King's own internal and private conflicts made public by J. Edgar Hoover's FBI. Marital infidelity, imperfection aside, the respect reserved for King has much to do with America's fascination with black men it regards as great, even those same men who have been demonized and killed before the defecation of American relationship with King. Since his death has been a one-sided love story centered on a man made out to be less human and complex than he actually was. I compared my father to King. My father, Abdal Din, was less great. But that was not what I think today. As I write and remember his humanity, Boo Boo, that was his father's nickname, was a black boy who may have dreamt about a life full of promises, resources, respect, and familiar love. But how much of life free of troubles and self-deprecation can a 15-year-old boy concerned with raising an infant build before his sense of self is devoured? How could he withstand the effects of immense poverty, lack of education, loveliness, lovelessness, and that's really just dealing with the throes of not really having support himself. And that goes back to what we spoke about earlier, generational curses. But let's get back. Outside of his home, restricted rules governing the code of Douglas black manhood he performed. Quest for eternal power to upset the reality of material disempowerment, the lure of the street, and the force of white Americans' fear induced policing of his body. Wow. Wow. One thing I really want to highlight out of that passage, what Mr. Darnell Moore was speaking of, was the Douglas black manhood he performed. We have to realize that Mr. Donnell Moore, because he's yet to come out, he is beginning to realize he really doesn't speak much on his sexuality during the early stages of his life, but he does hint at it. Does hit, his father, ideal of masculinity, of manhood, what a man should be, what he should walk like, what he should talk like. But Mr. Donnell Moore begins to throw in those subtle hints about what society feels, and even in the black community, what we feel in the black community, what manhood or the aesthetics of manhood represents. And we begin to see how the spectrum of sexuality, the spectrum of what we see as norms, the heteronormative norms, or or our ideal of what manhood or womanhood should be, and how that plays a part, especially with black males, and how that plays a part in how they see themselves and how they see others, and what they deem as respectable or what they deem as true manhood. We begin to see the aesthetics of that. I'm sorry. We begin to see the aesthetics of that really come into fruition as we dive deeper and deeper and deeper into the book. And one thing that I actually did highlight was the educational system, the lack of resources, and the judicial system. All these different things, the government within this, which failed his father and failed his mother because she was a struggling black mother, his whole family, and how they would have, and how he's trying to thrive in the system that's so chaotic, not just chaotic, but in some essence, they really feel that the system was not really tailored to assist them. And that's something that we still deal with today, even in present tense. Now, even in the present right now, a lot of black Americans feel that the system, the government in which whom we were supposed to place our trust in, does not have the ideal or the backing for the black community as we do for our white brethren or for the white community. How minorities in general, black, Hispanic, Native American, Oriental, whatever, how minorities in general feel that the system is chaotic and it really doesn't represent them or the essence of what this country was truly built on. And that's something that Mr. Moore screams out in each and every page. He wants to paint the picture that liberty and justice for all is limited to certain individual, and he wanted to paint the picture how a system which was built on giving everyone the American dream can skip over a generation, and how, because we're not in the throes of that American dream, how that can play a part in the rearing and the raising of a child, and how they can play a key component on the social emotional development of the individual. And we can, and as we can say, and then you can see in the somber tone that he's really expressing it is one of confusion. It is one of empathy, sympathy. But we also begin to see how America viewed the greatness of one black man versus the other. So there is a dual, or as W.B. Du Bois would say, a double conscious, a double conscious. All right, so we're going to move on because, whew, this it's in a very, I can say this right here. It's very emotional. Reading Mr. Moore book, not only does it captivate the soul and the mind, but it's very emotional. And some passages are harder to read than others. And I'm not gonna lie to you, reading that particular passage was very hard for me. Very hard. It was very emotional. It was very thought provoking. I had to literally put the book down and call my father and get an idea on his thoughts, because Miss Darnell Moore father has sadly passed on. But he writes in the beginning of the book how he wished he could have spoken with his father and really got an idea of why did he think the way he think, why did he behave the way he behaved, why was he so angry, like what are some of the things that he could have changed if he had the opportunity. So in reading it, I called my father and I wanted to get an idea on what he felt and how he went about life dealing with the same thing, being a teen father, not having his father really present because his father died at an early age. Him dealing with the educational system. My father was in and out of prison himself before he got his life on track. How did you deal with the aesthetics of life and government and the fear of the police and still trying to raise us and do what you have to do? Because my father did stick around, regardless of anything. He did stick around. But I want to know, like, did it ever cross your mind that you wanted to leave? Was it too hard for you? Like, how did you, get to the point where you can show us love? And that, what was your definition of manhood? How did you categorize there? How did you know to raise us a certain way, even though you didn't have that same foundation? So the relatability of the book was so moving that it caused me to, develop a deeper relationship with my father, and to really get to the point, like, to pick his brain, because his father and my father were born around the same time. So the rearing, I mean, so them growing up back during a chaotic time, even though this time is chaotic, it was really fascinating. I really want to know more and more and more, and I really feel like I was able to ask the question that Mr. Moore really wanted to ask his father. Um, so it's another thing that I really want to get to, and that's the essence of family, because this chapter that we're on right now is really dealing with the essence of family, the black family unit, the foundation of the black family, and we're still dealing with the tone. We're still dealing with the tone because, like, again, it's a somber but an emotional tone. But at the same time, we can see, if we get deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper to the book, the relatability of Mr. Moore is it's like it's a mirror in a way. You like, wow, I can relate to everything, like everything. So it's on page 56. Wrote it down again. It's on page 56. And let's see. All right. Okay. Again, so this, and on page 56, this is talking about the essence of the black family and the family unit. And when we talked about earlier, it takes a village. So he writes, and just going to read like a short passage from it. My mom and her siblings exemplified the true meaning of family. They argued and forgave. They were temporary enemies during certain stages of their lives, and they were lifeless. Then they were lifelines during times of need. Lack didn't impede their ability to care for one another. It made care possible. Their example taught me why it was and is necessary to reject stereotypes about black people without wealth. They were rich in empathy, support, and compassion. Had we been born into money, I believe we would have revered things. Our material possession, our material possessions, and our individual selves, the false gods of America capitalism, and not the people we snuggled up next to in twin side beds or in living room floors. Their powerful form of connection is what critiques of Camden means. People who live outside our city saw only the social problems that were present on the surface, but they failed to understand and take into account the fundamental, everyday ways in which black families like mine demonstrated care without our homes. Demonstrated care is within our homes, excuse me, even when care was not extended from City Hall, police headquarters, or the governor's office. Again, Mr. Moore really wanted to establish one essential truth. One essential truth. And that's something I agree with him wholeheartedly. The essential truth was this: when it comes to the aesthetic of the black family, because a lot of people have an ideal of what the black family looks like. There are stereotypical portrayals, do media outlets from certain shows, songs, and so forth. But one thing I can truly say that I truly agree with Mr. Moore is that the aesthetics of the black family, that togetherness is real. Coming together, the compassion, the empathy, this all of that. is real. One thing I can truly say, especially in my family, it took my aunts and my uncles, my grandmother, um, cousins, extended family members. When one was down, we were all down. When one was up, we were all up. And even now, the aesthetics of togetherness and oneness that we have is so strong. Just this past weekend, I'll just give you all an example. This past weekend, I had a family member who sadly passed away, and it just amazed me how the whole family rallied together. Even though they was in another state, the whole family rallied together to go and be with them in their time of need and to comfort them, and how we were all there, even though a lot of us are, due to the pandemic, are dealing with job loss, economic disparity. A lot of people didn't have the funding to get there, but they did everything that they could to make sure that they were there and that they were supportive. I can remember it was six of us. It was me and my brothers and sisters. We had a whole little clan going on, and how we all had to share a bed. We were in one bedrooms, and how we had to share a bed. But even with all six of the kids, with my mom and dad, we had aunties and uncles who would come and live with us because they couldn't get on their feet. But my mom and dad was still there, and even though we had little to nothing, we still extended what we had to help them. But that made me into the man that I am today, the individual that I am today. I'm a very compassionate individual, have a lot of empathy. I can see the good in everyone, just wanting to be a helping hand, which made me get into the career I am now, being a librarian, even coming from the throw of education, because before I became a librarian, being a former educator, a teacher, wanting to give back, wanting to help, not taking the resources that I've learned for selfish based needs, but to take the resources that I learned in college and in life in general, and helping other black children or just people in general, wanting to give back. That, I mean, like, but it all stems from the foundation that my parents and the family unit had in my rearing. And this is the same thing that Mr. Darnell Moore is talking about. He speaks on the aesthetics of the black family. He speaks on the importance of the black family, wanting to take away the stereotypical portrayal that a lot of Americans have. And dealing, especially during this time, the political climate, the things, dealing with the policing, dealing with police brutality, just being black in America in general. He really wants to pay, because there is a stereotypical portrayal of black Americans, of black men, of black women, of black children. The fact that he has to highlight the fact that black children can't even aren't even seen as black children. The fact that he have to highlight that black women aren't even seen as black women. The fact that he has to highlight that there's a certain portrayal that they see of a black man. And he talks about the duality of how America sees what they perceive as a great black man and a proverbial nightmare, which was his father, the aesthetics of street life. The relatability. I'm going to keep going back to that because that's something I really want you all to get. The relatability that Mr. Moore is really trying to put out there um, is something in itself captivating. I'm going to do one more thing before I get ready to head out, because again, I want to hold you all long. We're going to try to keep this as short as possible. At the same time, we're working. We're working. Um, Let me see. All right. So this is one part that in reading any book, we want to think about the narrative. Okay. Think about the narrative, the setting, the tone, so forth. Um, One question that I actually wrote, I'm going to answer it, is what relationships is he trying to inspire? And I know you all are like, what do you mean by relationships? Like, the relationships in which I'm speaking of is, it goes back to relatability. What is he trying to prove? What was the point of writing the book? What's the point of him giving like intense details of his life? The relationship that Mr. Moore is trying to prove is that the relationship. Let me go back and let me answer this. A relationship that he's trying to prove is a humanistic relationship. It goes back to a book that I was reading, Alando Equiana, Narratives of a Slave, and how in the first couple of chapters of that book, when I read it back in college, in the first couple of chapters, he talked about the bathing rituals. He talked about the matriarchic and the patriotic society. He talks about how they govern the land. He talks about how the economic system was. He talked about the griots or the storytellers who passed down the history of their tribe. And one thing my professor said, and which made me write the same thing, not reading this book, she stated, "What's the relationship Equiana is trying to establish with his reader?" Because during that time, he wrote this in the 17th century, early 17th century at that. And this is during the early stages of the abolitionist movement. I think it was late 17th century because he died in the 18th century. So this is during the time of the abolitionist movement, which started over in England, which began to come into the colonies. And my professor stated, she's like, why did Orlando Equiana take his time to write, I mean, three chapters about the aesthetics of his culture and bathing rituals and so forth? What relationship was he trying to establish, even though the rest of the book speaks on him being a slave and him escaping and telling about the horrors of chattel slavery? And I remember sitting there and just really thinking and pondering that question. Because first thing I want to say was, okay, she could have asked about the tone, she could have spoke on the narrative, but she wanted to speak on the relationship. I'm like, is he even trying to establish a relationship? And then it hit me like a ton of bricks. And I just remember shooting my hand up and excuse me. I remember shooting my hand up and I said, Professor, I think I know. I believe Orlando Equiana is trying to establish a humanized relationship. He wanted to humanize the black community. And excuse me, he wanted to humanize the black community. And when I wrote that question as I was reading, it came back to me. What relationship is he trying to establish? Humanity. He wants to humanize the black community. Not just humanize the black community, but it goes back to the first thing I said earlier, to show the relatability that my life is no different than your life. Your life is no different than my life. We all have to go through struggles. We all went through something. There's some point in your life, either dealing with your parents, the way you were raised, or so forth, that impacted who you are today. And that's what he wanted to show. Their relatability. That's relationship that he was trying to establish. To show you that how his life impacted him as the man he became today. The activist, the individual who speaks on police brutality, who speak on racial or speak on racial issues, who speaks on judicial systems, who speaks on economic disparity, who speaks on the lack of education and the resources dealing with the black community. To show you how the foundation of his life came to full fruition to who he is today. So we're gonna stop right there because we can keep going all day long, y'all. That's how excited I am. I'm a book lover. I love books. So we're gonna stop right there, and we will continue. We have just a couple more chapters to go, and we're almost there. We're almost towards the end. We are running this race, but we are almost towards the end. So again, I want to thank you all for coming out, for sharing this time. I'm going to leave you with a small quote from Mr. Moore. It's only right. Let's see. Let's go back to page 56 when we talk about the aesthetics of the black family. Back to page 56. Okay. And he speaks on the aspect of care. Okay. Care does not look like police patrolling blighted neighborhoods in search of people who fit the description of assumed criminals, to fill up jail cells and meet quotas, both built on false premise that black people are more prone to violence, to ensure the safety of people they know. and strangers they don't, who have been assailed, who have been assimilated by police many times for no reason other than the color of their skin. I observed many interventions as a youth. Care, the kind of support that one gives to push another towards wholeness, is not a consequence of apathy. Welfare legislation designed to redeem the poor, whom most people assume loathe working and rely on the state of handouts. It is not about care if it is grounded in the truth that our American economic system has always purposefully favored the rich. Care is my Aunt Arlene, stealing food, mindful of the consequences if she were to be caught. So her sisters and brothers' bellies could be a bit more full when they lay their heads to rest. My family cared deeply in the absence of policies and programs, in the absence of policies and programs that are grounded in love. As a child, I assumed the world was full of people just like them who love just as hard and sacrifice just as much. That is why I played more than I worried as a child. Key thing, he said. That is why I played more than I worried as a child. Again, it goes back to what we just spoke on, how a lot of black children have the privilege of being a child. It's why I smile more than I frown. It's what made me remember the good nights before the bad mornings. My mom and her people protected me from the truth and taught me that the world outside our door, a short distance away from home, a world inhabited by white people and black people with money, may not be as hospitable. But I will also learn that the safest spaces like our homes can be just as hostile. Again, I want to thank you all for being here and joining me for another segment of this book review, No Ashes in the Fire, as we go deeper and deeper and deeper into the book. Um, it just it gives me more understanding, allows me to stand more and confidently in my truth, and to understand that what we perceive as care and love and hate and so forth, it's all based on perspective. So again, thank you so very much for coming. I cannot wait to see you all next time. Hopefully we'll meet again. Again, I want to apologize for the delay, but due to technology, everyone is using the internet right now. But due to technology, problems would arise. But alas, we are here, and I see your beautiful faces once more. Again, my name is Aaron. Thank you so very much for joining me here at the Reading Rain Book Club, and we'll see you again. Y'all be good.